Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Textile Talk. I'm Lucy Shakin, SAQA's Communications Coordinator and your Textile Talks organizer. I'm going to apologize in advance for any background noise you might hear. There is construction being done on the exterior of my apartment. I'll be muted for most of the talk, so hopefully it won't be too distracting. Textile Talks are presented by the International Quilt Museum, Quilt Alliance, Studio Art Quilt Associates, or SAQA, and Surface Design Association. We love bringing you these free programs every week, thanks to the support of our sponsors and contributions from viewers like you. If you enjoy Textile Talks, please consider making a donation at saqa.com/tt-support. And if you would like to be on Textile Talks, we are currently accepting proposals for our 2024 season. If you're a fiber artist, researcher, or curator with a story to tell, we would love to hear from you. That info is at saqa.com/calls. I also want to invite you to our upcoming virtual conference, Art in Place. For the first time, we are making our conference available to everyone, not just SAQA members. If you enjoy Textile Talks, you will love this program. Our keynote speaker is the phenomenal Carolyn Crump, and we'll have presentations from artists all over the world, like Yoko Sakita, a Japanese artist who makes incredibly detailed storytelling quilts. It takes place July 14th and 15th, and everything will be recorded and available for 3 months afterwards, so you can watch anywhere and at your own pace. Learn more about this at saqa.com/artinplace. A few Zoom notes before we begin. This is a webinar, so we can't see or hear you, but we can read your comments in the chat. If you have questions during today's program, please type them into the Q&A function. We will have some time for questions at the end of the program. If you have suggestions for ways we can improve or for topics you'd like to see in future Textile Talks, please let us know in the post-event survey. We have closed captions turned on for this program. You can turn these on or off by finding the live caption or CC button in your settings. Today's topic is Art Evolved Intertwined, Basketry and Art Quilts in Conversation. It's all about our newest global exhibition, which opens this weekend at the Yellowstone Art Museum in Billings, Montana. You just saw a video of all the artwork, which will play again at the end. This exhibition is the first of its kind, a collaboration between SAQA and the National Basketry Organization, showcasing the best in art quilts and basketry. We're joined today by NBO Executive Director Pam Morton and Bill Reker, SAQA Director of Global Exhibitions, filling in for Martha Seelman. They'll discuss the collaborative process of creating the exhibition. After that, we'll hear from exhibiting artists Irene Roderick and Cael Chappell. So now I would like to invite Pam and Bill to come on screen, and we'll go ahead and get started. And Pam, you'll need to unmute there. There we go. So would you tell us a little bit about how this exhibition came to be?
Hi, so I'm Pam Morton, NBO's Executive Director. Just a quick thing to all the people who were just at our conference in the University of Puget Sound in Tacoma, Washington. I hope you enjoyed yourself, and it's great to have you join us today. So this idea came about over the course of the pandemic, actually. SAQA hosted a craft symposium for executive directors and board members, I think within the first year of the pandemic. And then we started meeting in smaller groups with executive directors. Martha hosts several of those groups. They meet monthly. And as we met, we realized there was power in multiple organizations, and Martha and I talked and decided that baskets and quilts had many collegial ways of joining each other, and that there is much more strength and power in collaboration of organizations. It opens all kinds of doors to different exhibits, doors to potential funders, and really shines a light on the craft movement in general, and much more the possibilities of how we can work together. And it's really important. As Lucy said, it is the first exhibition of its kind. We're really proud and pleased to be a part of it. some of the ways we collaborated on this was just starting from the nitty-gritty of how do we describe what this is, what both organizations do, what's the wording going to be like. We did some wordsmithing. So both exhibition committees for the organizations were comfortable with how we expressed what this was going to be. We had to work through our memorandum of understanding and what that was going to be like. And really, we are stronger when we work together. I think it's been wonderful. We're proud to be partners with SAQA, and I've also had the lovely opportunity of working with Bill and finding out how they do as many exhibitions as they do every year, and package them and ship them and build crates. So it's been a learning experience for us. We at NBO really want to create a big, broad tent for people to be a part of our organization. So if you call yourself a basket maker, then so do we. If you use underlying basketry techniques in making your basket or your art, then that also, we will label you a basket maker. And we are happy to have as many people join our community as possible. And I think with that, I'm going to turn it over to Bill now.
Thank you, Pam. First of all, it's been great working with the National Basketry Organization, working with all the new artists. Take a look when we run the screen, the video of the pieces of artwork. I've had the joy of seeing them all in person, and I can tell you, go to a museum, see them. This exhibition has already been booked into 4 museums. It's starting off at the Yellowstone Art Museum. From there, later on this year in December, it's traveling to the Pacific Northwest Museum of Quilts and Textiles. It's going down to the Irene Roderick Museum of Art down in Laurel, Mississippi. And it's going out to the Fuller Craft Museum in Massachusetts. We're still looking for other venues. There'll be 1 or 2 more museums added, but starting off with 4 museums before the show's even curated or juried is just phenomenal. We were lucky to pool 3 really strong jurors. We sat down with NBO and we said, who do we want for jurors? Let's get people that know quilts, they know baskets, and they know art. Who's in the museum world? How can we expand this? And that's what we did. We were really lucky to have 3 really great jurors. The artwork you see before you, the slides that are going right now, first glance, it's quilters making weavings or basketry, and it's basket people making quilts. But one of the things we've long noticed in SAQA, with our broad definition of an art quilt, similar to NBO having a broad definition of what is basketry, is we have a lot of artists that are working in textiles. They're using some of the similar techniques, the same styles, but some of their stuff is 2-dimensional, some of their stuff is 3-dimensional. They do sewing, they do applique, they do some weaving. So Christine Chester, whose work is appearing and now it's gone, is a great example of someone who's a member of SAQA and does work in other textile techniques. Now with Studio Art Quilt Associates, we've been saying for several years now, we're open to 3D work, we're open to installation work, and we've gotten some great works. What this new exhibition did, what Art Evolved Intertwined did, is it allowed artists who are working in other techniques, other styles, to feel comfortable submitting it to an exhibition because it was going to have a place. And all of these pieces, they really work together great. Having these, what I guess some people would call crossover pieces from the different artists who are doing stuff that's just a little bit different than the organization, but fits in well with the other, pulls the exhibition together really great. And I have to say, this is probably one of the strongest exhibitions we've ever put together. It opens up on Friday at the Yellowstone Art Museum, as Lucy said. Go see it. I'm waiting for the pictures to come in. I'll share pictures. We're sending out videos. I'll share videos with everyone. Can't say enough. As far as working with another organization, as I said, Pam was wonderful to work with, her exhibition committee, our exhibition committee. Everybody had one goal, and that was to create a great exhibition with fabulous artwork. And keeping that goal in mind, And knowing that we wanted to represent the art, we wanted to get it out to new audiences. We wanted new audiences to see our artists. As long as we kept that goal and that focus point, it really was a driving force to pull this exhibition together. Then, when we got down into the nitty gritty of who's going to handle what workflow, who's going to, do the paperwork, who's going to do the, it was just, well, who has to? Who can get this done? How do we make this happen? And that's one of the joys of working with SAQA and with NBO now, I can say, is it's just what do we need to do to get this done? How can we get our members' artwork out there? So, both organizations exist to promote our artwork and to support our members and get their artwork out there. And I think we've successfully done that. Okay, we've got a few minutes here. Pam, is there anything else you want to say? You've seen all the artwork, you've seen what we've got, you've seen it, the catalog we've put together. Other thoughts? What would you tell another organization? I'm going to ask you questions now, as far as what to do, what to come prepared for when you're reaching out to another organization to do an exhibition of this type.
I think that being open to possibilities, which is how Martha and I started off with this, that well, what might this look like? How can we collaborate? Can we collaborate? NBO is a very small organization. We have around 700 members. SAQA is much larger with thousands of members. So we divided the workload up by our organization's ability and wrote a contract that recognized the disparity in those abilities. So how organizations would be compensated fairly, where nobody felt taken advantage of. I think that was really important. And the fact is, have always been a believer in collaboration. And I think we're stronger when we do it. I know I've said that before, but it's really true. And it opens up doors that might not have been open to either organization without the other one. SAQA has been a pleasure to work with. And I know I still have another several years to be working with Bill and Martha and everybody else in your organization. And I think our members were so intrigued by the idea of the collaboration because it's never happened before. It's really nice to do something for the first time, be the first groups out there saying, yes, we can work together. We don't have to just take a piece of pie and divide it. We can take a piece of pie and share it.
Let's get that whole pie next time. We'll forward great collaborations. Okay, so we're really happy now to have two of the artists in the exhibition, one from SAQA, one from the National Basketry Organization. So I hope you've enjoyed the artwork and hearing a little bit about the process that went into this. And now we're really happy to invite Irene Roderick from Art Quilt Associates to talk to you about her artwork that's in the exhibition. And take it away, Irene.
Hello, and thank you, Bill. And it is such an honor to be in this exhibition and such an honor to be here today. I'm going to share my screen. There we go. All right. First of all, it was great to be invited here today to talk about my quilt that's here. It's called Twitter, and you can see on the right the two inspirations for this quilt. Those are my two parakeets, Pete and Paul. So a little bit about myself and my quilt practice. I've always been an artist and a crafter. I've practiced my art by working in needlepoint design. I have built and designed and painted furniture. I've done a lot of large-scale painting and many, many murals. I raised 4 boys, and so I was really old when I finally had the opportunity to return to school, and I got my Bachelor's of Fine Arts down the street where I am at the University of Texas. And then I was lucky enough to get into California Institute of the Arts for my master's degree, and I graduated when I was 51. The picture here is of what I was making when I graduated from graduate school. You can see it's very large. It's white on white. It's very lace-esque and done on Mylar architectural film. After I graduated, I came home and I started making these large pieces. I got rid of the architectural film and just started dripping latex paint onto wax paper and made very large scale, I call them motorcycle doilies. I actually just push pin the paint directly onto the wall. And this, as you can see, is pretty much life size. And in my true fascination with motorcycles, I also decided to make some out of cardboard. This is a life size. You can kind of see what the cardboard looks like. And I covered each of them in different kind of materials. This is my favorite. So I covered it in batting and upholstery fabric. Then in 2014, I was getting ready to start retiring and I built myself a tiny house to live in. And you can see, you walk in that orange door right there and the first thing you see is the bed. So I wanted to have a really cool blanket on the bed. So I Googled modern quilt. And of course, what happens? I come up with early Nancy Crow, Denise Schmidt, Gwen Marston, Joe Cunningham. These are amazing, and that's what I decided I wanted. So in order to get one, I realized I'd have to make it myself. So I went to my local quilt store and I took a beginning quilt class and I loved it so much. I came home, put the brushes away, got the sewing machine out, built a design wall and started quilting. So I started with pretty simple things, of course, as I am wont to do. And this is a block of the month, fussy cut, EPP hexi quilt. And I had such a blast making this. It was just great. And then the next one I decided to make was a double wedding ring for son number 3. He was getting married and they had these funny little dog things for their theme for their wedding. So I put those in the center of each of the rings. And then one night I was washing dishes and the news was on and I heard the word quilt on the news and I turned around and they were doing a news story on a quilt convention. And so of course I stopped and went over and watched and it was QuiltCon 2015 here in Austin. And I went down on the next day and fell in love with every single quilt in the show. I'd never seen so much really fine art all in one place. I watched all the demos. I spent all weekend down there and vowed that I would get in the next QuiltCon exhibition. So I went home and my grandson and I were heavy duty into minions and I made the minion quilt, which actually did get in the next QuiltCon. So I was working like that for a while. And then one day I was driving around town with my 2 good buddies, Rita and Ursula, and we were talking about our favorite artists. And they both mentioned Friedrich Hundertwasser, who I'd never heard of. So we came home and they were showing me what he did. And I was amazed. These are some prints of his, and you can see they're made for quilts. We have log cabins, we have checkerboards. These are amazing. And since I, of course, wanted one of these, I decided I had to make it. So the next Sunday, I started throwing together some of the elements that he was using. I started with log cabins and started just throwing them on my design wall. Well, the next thing I know, I'm throwing big leftover pieces of fabric. I'm throwing the ones I'm making. I'm throwing just whatever I can find on the board. And I am having more fun than I'd ever had creating anything. So this was my first improv quilt. And the one on the right is the next one. It's a little more complex, but it was actually made the same way. And at this point, I just went crazy. So here are a couple of the crazy quilts. I just started building quilts the way I would build a painting and having just so much fun. And these are 2 from that period. Then one day Rita came up to me, my buddy, and she said, how about some indigo? And I said, sure. So we made an indigo vat and we got books and we read online and we learned how to dye indigo and shibori. And It was during this time period that somebody asked me to do a workshop. And I thought, how do you do a workshop when it's improv? And so on this quilt, clinging to the edge, I started writing down every single step that I was making to make this quilt, and realizing I was going from the design wall to the cutting table to the sewing machine and then to the iron and back all day long, listening to music. And that's where my whole dancing with the wall concept came from. And speaking of dancing, I thought, well, this would be fun. So I decided to do a series based on dances and movement. You can see a couple here. Here's flamenco with the red skirts flowing, and dance and celery, I think, is more steampunk, kind of robot dance. This is Dancing with Belle from her ball gown in the Disney Beauty and the Beast in that beautiful swirling skirts. And then Limbo, which is basically more calypso and with little sticks. And I was having so much fun making these little sticks that I thought, I wonder if I could make a quilt that looks like a drawing. And so that moved me on to my line drawing quilts. Here are two of them. And this was the first one, landscape, and then drawing in black and white. I actually made for the Curated Quilts magazine Black and White Challenge. So I was having some fun, and then COVID hit. And as we heard on the news all the time, kind of the phrase, we're all in this together. So I thought, well, what else do we all do together? And realized that we all make marks from the beginning of time. So I did research on mark making, starting with the prehistoric times and getting all the way to today, all the way across the globe. And realized, of course, because we're all kind of built the same, that we all make very similar marks. And so I started a collection of marks. And when I would piece a quilt, I would get out my fabric pens and I would start drawing the marks on them. And these are just two from that period. Now, in the tiny house, anything that's on my design wall creates the ambiance in the room. And so things were getting pretty sticky with the COVID situation and the political situation. And I needed to lower my anxiety level. And so I came up with these quieter quilts. I challenged myself to see how big of a curve could I piece. And these quilts each are about 5 by 6 feet. And I was having a lot of fun with that. And these curves then turned into circles. I needed to bring color back in. And so I was making these circles and playing with all of my fabric stash. And then they kind of turned into heads. And then the heads needed bodies. And a student of mine at the time said, well, that you should call them guardians. So I did. So these are the guardian quilts. And I really think I was just making other entities during lockdown so that I could interact with. And I made about 10 in this series. I kept saying I wasn't going to make any more, then the next one would just come out. And I really enjoyed these. And then the heads grew. And I started playing with Procreate on my iPad and started drawing pictures. And one of my friends, I showed it to her and she went, well, you can't make a quilt like that. Said, watch me. So I took these drawings and I started making them into quilts. And these are two of my favorites that were made during that period. Finally, the world opened up and I got an opportunity to go to Nancy Crow's barn and take improv and fell in love with her concept of whopper jaw shapes. This is her term. So these are two of the quilts that I made in that. And they're about almost 8 feet tall. And I just love taking these shapes and playing with them. And so this is another one that I did in that same series with the same shapes, except I tweaked it to be more of an Irene quilt. And so I would put big pieces of black fabric on the wall and start covering them with color and then sewing them together at the end. And Nancy had told me, she said, you need a studio. So I actually found a studio and it had a 25-foot wall. Well, you give me a 25-foot wall and I'm going to fill it up. So I started placing these big shapes made out of black fabric down the wall. And this was the first long quilt I made. As you can see, I couldn't figure out how to quilt it, so I just decided to cut it into sections, and I call it Waiting in Line at South by Southwest. These are zipped together, but you can rearrange them. So like this purple guy needs to go get a beer, and he comes back and he sees this turquoise guy, and he hadn't seen him in a year, so he stops to talk to him. And so the line rearranges just like it really does. And the next quilt I made was Twitter. And I couldn't decide when I got the studio whether to take the birds to the studio or leave them at home. And I left them at home, and then I was just throwing black pieces on the wall, and I turned around and went, oh, those look like my birds. And so these are just big black fabric templates, and these were scraps, and just started laying things out on my wall. And then covering them, I'm kind of going through this more slowly with colors until I had all the color filled in. And then I started working and filling in the background. And you can see in the center section, he's the black, white, and black. And what happened was, as I was taking the fabrics off to sew them together, I realized I really liked the black in there. So in the finished piece, you will see there's a bit of orange and a bit of purple, but I put black in, and I also then could put details. So here is the pieced one, and here is finished Twitter. So that 25-foot wall, it was fun. So I kept putting more big shapes on the wall and playing with design. This one I liked in black and white so much that I actually finished it in black and white. It's a triptych. It's about 20 feet long. It's divided into 3 sections. It's not zipped, but they are hung together as a triptych, or they can actually be hung alone. And the next summer, I went to Whidbey Island and got to visit Marcia Durst in her studio and bought a bunch of her fabric. And I wanted to play with it. So once again, using the big shapes, except I'm using bigger pieces of fabric. And I went through my stash, and I found, this is Marcia Durst. I found some Leslie Jennison Tucker. I found some bad plaids, and then I dyed some fabric. And this one is really only about 12 feet long. On this one, I started with the black shapes, and I put it into Procreate because I didn't know what colors I wanted to use. And then I decided, well, yeah, I kind of like that. So this fabric that has the circles didn't exist. So I actually had it printed at Spoonflower, and the rest of these are pretty much commercial fabrics. I call this one Party Conversation because it just looks like fun. And these are champagne bubbles. And this entire series is called Conversations. This is another one I did. I was out of town. I bought some, this is gemstone ombres. I bought fabrics by my favorite designers. And I bought a roll of silk, and I didn't know what to do with them. So I just decided to use them in panels so that they really would show. And I just finished this piece entirely. And then I gave the studio up. I moved into a duplex, and I needed to get out of the studio, and I had made some black and white little sketches in fabric, and I decided to do a last hurrah. So I got some black photographic backdrop paper, which is really great for making big shapes. And I cut out the shapes, put them on the wall, filled them in with color, as you see here. Here it is before I pieced it, right before I took it off the wall. And up here in the corner, it's pieced now. This is in my bedroom, and it's just waiting to be quilted. So that's it. So thank you very much. And now here's Kale to talk about his baskets.
Thank you very much, Irene. That was amazing and inspirational. That's for sure. I came to basket making from sort of a strange, circuitous route. I had a very unconventional upbringing, living often with no indoor plumbing or electricity. This on the bottom right is papaya shack that we lived in Hawaii. My sister and I, there were some bananas. We lived on a tiny little boat, in a bread truck, in a car, in a tent, sometimes homeless, sometimes, trying to improve our situation. When I turned 19, I had gone to community college for a year. And when I turned 19, I got a job offer for $5 an hour working at an African art gallery. I had a special skill that they needed, and it wasn't holding elephant noses, but it was typing really fast inventory information into spreadsheets. So they started sending me to Africa to work on various logistics, purchasing, trying to figure out how to get things from Zimbabwe to California. So a lot of my stories start in Africa, and that's no different here with my basket making. In 2002, I received my first shipment of baskets after I finished with the African Art Gallery, and wanted to have a project to support rural African weavers and give them, sustainable living wages while also preserving culture and educating people in the US about Africa. And I don't really recommend, this is a live crocodile. I don't recommend getting that close to one. I'm not sure what I was thinking that day, but I was working with basket weavers and started very small in my living room with my two boys and going to farmers markets and working out of a storage unit. Eventually, it grew to a large scale, fairly large scale. We have 4 part-time employees now and 7,000 square feet, 22 different countries represented, and more than 15,000 different baskets. So the largest selection of African baskets in the world. I was exposed to all different types of baskets, going across Africa and collecting. These are just a few examples of coiled baskets. And the weavers would always ask me to stay and weave baskets with them. You must stay, sit under the tree and weave baskets. And I would always tell them, I don't have the time, patience, creativity, skill to do that. You do that there in Africa, and I'll take your baskets to America and try to find you buyers. So in 2017, just under 6 years ago, I had somebody locally here in Albuquerque showed me the basics of twining and coiling. And she actually asked me, well, what do you want to make? And I said, I want to make baskets with lots of patterns. And she said she had never made a basket and she had never made a pattern. So I spent about a year or so trying to make perfect shapes and forms and patterns and figure out how many different patterns I could make. But I was really focused on trying to make perfect shapes and patterns. And it was very frustrating. So now when I go to Africa, of course, I do sit and weave baskets with the basket weavers wherever I'm visiting. And that's a lot of fun. And they get a kick out of it too, because it's not normally, baskets aren't normally woven by men in Africa. So in 2018, the culmination of my personal exploration of trying to figure out how to make baskets was this piece here, and it got accepted into an NBO Basketry Now exhibition. At that exhibition, I also saw the work of another basket maker, Norman Sherfield, and Norman's work is very whimsical. And I asked him, what is this? What are we looking at? What's this piece that we're looking at? And he just said, it could be a sea creature, it could be an alien, I don't know. But it really kind of sunk in to me that I didn't have to be so serious. I didn't have to try to make things perfect, that I could have more fun along the way. So at the end of 2018, I attended a school with Lois Russell, and then I actually learned the proper techniques of twining. I'm working with thread, a wax linen thread, and weaving thousands of stitches to make small scale work. The combination of taking this class from Lois Russell and the input from Norman Sherfield's that, I could just have fun led me to the Success series. I have a bunch of different series that I have going, and then whenever I feel like it, I make a new piece for that series. But this was the first of the Sussesk series. This was the second one, Truffula. These pieces are, some of them I weave a counterweight into the bottom, so you can't see it, but they actually stand very well. They don't fall over because there's a weight in the bottom. Now I have a little process video here that kind of shows you start at the bottom when you're weaving a basket. You have all of these spokes or warp, if you're a loom weaver, and then you stitch around them with your weft. It's all by hand. There's no tools or anything, just scissors to cut your thread. And the basket will grow and grow. And I don't really have a plan in mind when I start weaving. I start with a concept, and then I just see what happens. You're in conversation with the basket. You might want the basket to do something, and it doesn't want to. So you just have to kind of listen to that and go along. And in the end, you have some sort of a creation. But that conversation with the basket and the material is critical to the whole process. So here I'm building what I call a compound rim, where I have multiple rims layered on top of each other in order to hide all the ends, because you have all of these threads and all of these ends, they have to go somewhere. So there's that finished piece there. And another thing I was exploring and still am, like I said, I sort of do a little bit every once in a while, is these exposed spokes. So the warp or the spokes are actually freestanding and exposed just by tension. So I'll have to weave structures inside the basket that you'll never see in order to keep it strong enough and have the tension. This is another series I call Basketry Alchemy, with lots of little baskets sealed into a glass tube. It's, I don't know why. I was making little baskets and I didn't know how to display them. Like, what do you do if you make 50 little baskets? How do you display those? So I came up with this idea of sort of sealing them into this test tube. And sometimes I make very small baskets as well. This is out of silk, 122 ply silk. And it's a little bit smaller than a mat shed. That brings us to Art Evolved Intertwined, and my piece for that show. This is 9.5 by 6 by 4.75 inches. And this, up to that point, was the largest piece I had ever made. It was about 120 hours. It's like you're weaving, it's almost like you're weaving a textile, but one stitch at a time. You don't have a warp, you don't have a shed that you open and close like on a loom. You have to twist that fiber around those spokes every single time. So this is a piece, this is a bit you'll never see if you go to the exhibit, which you should. This is the base of the piece. And again, it grows from the bottom up, and there's a couple of process photos. This is 192 spokes or warps. And the number of spokes and the size of the spokes and the size of the weft or the weavers will determine the size of the final piece. And here I did something a little different. I capped the top so you can't see inside most of the basket. You can only see inside a little bit, and there's this cap woven in. So I wanted to thank SAQA and NBO for the opportunity to be in this exhibit. I'm very honored to be in it, and the catalog is fantastic. If anyone doesn't have that catalog yet, you should definitely get a copy. This is what I'm working on right now, one of the pieces I'm working on now, and it's 330 spokes. So this will be the largest piece I've ever done. And I kind of lost track of how many hundreds of hours I have in on this one. So that's a little bit about me and my story. And there's my contact information. And I think we're going to go back to Lucy and take some questions and answers.
Thanks very much, Kale. And at this point, I'd like to invite all of our panelists to come back on camera with me here. And we'll start with some of the questions from the audience. So this first one is for you, Kale. It's where is your business located in Albuquerque?
Oh, it's called Baskets of Africa, and it is in Albuquerque, New Mexico. It's a project, really not so much a business. It's designed to support weavers in Africa, and I don't take any pay from it, but it's we sell mostly online on our website, basketsofafrica.com.
Awesome, thank you. And Irene, this question is from Valerie. She would like to know a little bit about the quilt that is behind you.
Oh, this is a fun quilt. So I just bought all of these batik fabrics from Lund Fabrics in Lancaster, Ohio. And they've been making these since the 70s. And I also did a video on maximalism, which is kind of a new concept that's becoming well known in the quilt world. And so I thought I would use these great fabrics to make this very maximal quilt.
Beautiful. Here's some more questions for Kale. These are about the process. This person is asking, when you insert the counterweight, what do you use as a counterweight? And also, why did you add the cap inside the larger basket you showed? Is it structural?
It does add stiffness to add those caps, or what I learned when I was exposing those spokes on that green piece was that if I strengthen the inside of the basket by adding sort of those caps, but hidden inside, there's actually layers and layers of them. It made the basket a lot smaller so that those exposed spokes are held only by tension. There's no other treatment except tension, which, being thread, it's kind of hard to build something that will do that. So why I capped it, I don't know. I actually wanted to have a whole bunch more spokes to make more rim. There are actually 3 layers of rim, and you can't see them all. You can see 2 of them. When you look under the basket, you'll see one pattern, and when you look at the top, you see a different pattern, and they're layered. And in order to get a whole bunch more spokes in there but have it look nice and clean, I thought I would try that.
Very good. And this one is for Bill. I know that with SAQA, we're used to working with 2-dimensional and 3-dimensional work, but was there anything new that you learned or any challenges that you came up against working with these baskets and handling them?
No, we were lucky in this regard that we had a show several years ago called 3D Expression, where all of the work were 3D, they were sculptural, they were structural. So we had that as a test run. So this time, the only thing different was I probably used a lot more packing peanuts than I normally would. But a lot of the artists, they did a great job packing. And for the new pieces that came in and stuff, I sat back and I looked and said, what did the artists do? How did they ship it? How did they protect it? To give me a starting point, and then said, okay, how can I do it better? So it's a challenge there. So I enjoyed it.
Oh, and this one says, asking again about the counterweight. We skipped that part. So what do you use as a counterweight, Kale?
Sorry.
Sorry.
I've tried a bunch of different things. It depends. I first started with a socket. I was looking around my garage and I found, a long socket. So that Sucesc Truffula has a socket like I don't know how else to describe it, a socket from a socket set in there. So it's a really heavy piece of round metal. And then after that, I figured out that I could use tractor bushings. Tractor bushings are like circular pieces of metal that kind of fit inside each other. And depending on how much weight I wanted or not, and some like the piece for Art Evolved Intertwined, Emergence, that one doesn't have any counterweighting at all.
Irene, we have a number of questions here about your piecing process. Okay. So this person says, are they pieced and not appliqued? Another person would like to know how you account for the seam allowances when you're putting the pieces up on the design wall. And someone else is asking whether you use hand sewing or machine sewing.
They are pieced. They're all pieced by machine. It's a great challenge. I love that engineering part. And so, yeah, I do not applique hardly ever. And I do not account for seam allowance when I'm building on the wall. because I know the whole piece will shrink proportionally. And so the designs don't change in any huge way by not having seam allowance there. And so I just pretend like it's paint and just put those fabrics up there and then sew them together all by machine.
Fantastic. And then there are a couple more questions here for Kale. One person is asking what materials you're using, and another person would like to know your threads per inch on your baskets. And this last question is, I know you generally work small. Is that a practical consideration, or is there something that appeals to you about those miniature forms?
One thing that appeals to you when you're weaving with thread about smaller forms rather than something huge like this is considered huge for me, is that you can do them faster. So that's why I was doing those little baskets that I put in the glass tube. It was a lot faster and kind of in some ways more fun that you just do one and finish it, do one and finish it, do one and finish it. I could do one a night. And over the course of 2 months, I could finish one of those pieces by doing one a night, because of course I work full time. So this piece is, you can kind of see in the camera here, this is 7-ply waxed linen thread as the spokes, and 4-ply, so it's smaller, waxed linen thread for the weavers. And the wax on the waxed linen thread helps it to stick together, because it's very, very stiff, the whole thing. And I add these, I'll add these ridges into the basket to add structural integrity also. It's partially design, but it's partially like, I need some more structure here. I'm going to add some ridges. I think there were 3 questions and I probably didn't answer them.
The last one was your threads per inch.
Threads per inch. That's a good question. I haven't counted it, but for example, it's different. So this is with the 4-ply over 7-ply, you end up with, quite a few. This is something like 30,000 stitches so far, just as a rough guess, at least 30,000. The smaller, like the silk, the tiny one that was, small as a match head, that has so many threads per inch. Even I actually weave sometimes just by touch with my fingers, and then I'll check it with a jeweler's loop afterwards to make sure I haven't made any mistakes. So threads per inch will vary depending on the size of the material you're using. But generally the largest size I'll use is the 7-ply as a weaver. And usually I like to use the 4-ply as a weaver because there are more colors available in the 4-ply.
This question is for Pam. They'd like to know, are there any walnut bark basket weavers in your group?
Actually don't have that answer. Kale, what do you know?
I have not heard of any walnut bark weavers. No, lots of other bark weavers, but I haven't heard of walnut bark. No.
Me neither. Yeah.
And this other person would like to know how they can contact the National Basketry Organization. So could you tell us your website, and maybe Jennifer can also put the link in the chat for us here?
Sure. Our website is nationalbasketry.org. And on the website, there's links. You can reach the office. All the board members' emails are listed. And actually, Joan, our administrative manager, who is in the audience, also just put the website in the chat. So
Fabulous.
You can find all of us on the About page under board and staff. Yeah.
Great, thank you. And just quickly, someone asked, will this be available to watch again? Yes, we are recording, and we will post the recording on our YouTube channel sometime in the next couple of days, so you'll be able to find it there. And if you opted into our emails when you registered for this Textile Talk, you'll get an email for us on Tuesday with the link to the recording as well. This is a last quick question for Irene. Could you please repeat the name of the fabric store in Lancaster, Ohio?
Lunn Fabrics, L-U-N-N. And they also have an Etsy shop that you can just look up, L-U-N-N Fabrics.
Awesome. Thank you very much. So we are just about out of time for today. I just want to thank you so much, Bill, Pam, Irene, and Kale, for being our guests. And to our audience members, stick around if you would like to see all the exhibition artwork again. And we will be back again on Textile Talks next week at the same time, same place, for Placemaking, Quilts and the Creation of Special Spaces, presented by the International Quilt Museum. As always, you can find all the details at SAQA.com/Textile Talks. And if you enjoyed Textile Talks, we would love it if you would tell a friend, post about us on social media, or consider supporting us financially with a donation at SAQA.com/TT support. I hope you all have a fantastic Wednesday. Thanks for watching.
Thank you.
Thank you.